Welcome to another edition of EJH Bridge Cars, and we're working on the motor today. So I thought I would show you how to set up the shims for the lower sprocket on the timing chains. So here's our motor, and I've just placed this on. I didn't bother to put the keyways in because I'll be taking it on and off. And I've just bolted that in place. That's not set to the adjustments or anything, but it needs to be tight. So then I've pushed the crankshaft forward. If you remember, there's about 3 thousandths clearance in the thrust bearings, so I need to take both measurements. So you're going to need a straight edge, and this is just out of a combination square. Now I bolted this on tight, so it's, of course, the cam's in there as well. So you lay it across the two cams. Here's a feeler gauge, check this dimension. So obviously I did this once before, so this is about 16 thousandths right now. So the other question is, what about the other way? So this is just a soft face mallet because I'm too lazy to yank on this. So we take the straight edge, put it up against the flush on the cam gear, and that's checking in at about 18 thousandths now, and the first dimension was 15 thousandths. So that sounds about right. It's supposed to be about 3 thousandths clearance on our thrust washers. So we want to set this, well, ideally it'd be at 16.5 thousandths, but shims don't come in that, so we need to build up something 16, 17 thousandths. So we need to get some shims. So I found a new one and an old one, and together they make 16, so that's good. So, and you can run in and find a Woodruff key, and then we'll go ahead and install these. So here's a little note for you. If you notice, this gear has a bevel cut into the side towards the block, and if you look closely, where the crank is machined, there's a slightly rounded shoulder there. So these new shims, particularly these are a little bit heavier, if you just put them on, they don't sit all the way close. I don't know if you can see that or not. If I push that like that, see how they're standing this proud of the face of the crank. So that's not a problem once this gets put back together, because this will go on, and then the other snout will come on, and then we'll bolt this down, and it gets like 75 foot-pounds or something like that, and that'll easily bend these shims. But if I just put them on there and then go to check my alignment, you'll see it's holding that top gear out. And with it in there, you can probably see this better now if I get a flashlight. So I've pushed that back. Look how far that gear is sitting away from the block. And that's because those shims hit that shoulder and stopped. And with, 18 thousandths of metal, me just pushing is not going to bend that. So when you do your measurements, do it the way I showed you, but if you double check when you're going back in, be aware, like these old shims, if you can see, I don't know if this will show up on the camera, but you can see there's a line there where this brass shim bent in. So when I put this shim in, it's pre-bent. So it works all right. So if you're using old shims, and there's nothing wrong with that, make sure you put them so that the bend piece is towards the engine if you're going to double check. Now in this case, those old shims are too thin because it needs, we decided 16, 17 thousandths. Those old shims are 4 or 5 thousandths. I suppose you could stack them up. But I've got new shims. So just be aware of that. And like I say, when this gets bolted up tight, that'll crush that. So anyway, and the other thing I wanted to talk about was Woodruff keys. So these are brand new Woodruff keys. There should be a tight fit into the engine. You should need to tap those in place. So you shouldn't need to make sure you put your shims on first because they won't go over these, by the way. But you can tell when that's driven home So it should just tap into place. If you feel like you got to really hammer on it, then something's wrong. Either you've got a bad Woodruff key, or I've actually had a crankshaft that was nitrated, and when they nitrated it, they didn't tape off the Woodruff keys, so the slots got additional material in them from the nitrating, which is only a few thousandths, but this is an interference fit. It's probably, the Woodruff key is probably 1 or 2 thousandths wider than the slot. So at 4 or 5 thousandths wider, that's a problem. And the problem I had was somebody had jammed them in and they were at an angle. And when they put the harmonic balancer on, it cracked the harmonic balancer right along that slot. And that harmonic balancer was on a stag, which harmonic balancers are absolute unobtainium. Only of all the years that I've looked for one, I've only ever seen one, and that was years after I needed it. And God only knows what kind of condition it was in. Fortunately, I had a friend who could fix it for me. So anyway, so this goes in. The larger dimension on the boss goes towards the block. This is how we measured it as well. That goes on, and then that should go on over that Woodruff key. And again, it's a bit of a tight fit, but that's okay. All right, so that's on all the way now. I did have to clean the keyway up in this gear a little bit. I have to admit, this gear, I don't know where it came from. It was a new part that was sitting on my shelf for donkey's years. But I had to turn the inner bore 2 or 3 thousandths to get it to fit correctly. And that keyway was just messily machined. So I had to just run a file and clean it up. Should also note that the crank, the very edge of the snout, was mushroomed out a couple of thousandths, which I've seen that on other cranks. I don't know whether that's from the snout going on or what. So, but it just took a file and cleaned it up, and that's let it go on. So this is still snug. And don't forget that a Woodruff key, there's not really supposed to be any play because it's supposed to really index it. So, anyway, the next thing that needs to be done is we need to time the camshaft. So to do that, we're going to have to get the motor up to top dead center. So let me just go get a gauge and we'll do that. All right, so I've got a dial indicator on top of the pistons, magnetic base, and I've set the pointer to 0 for you because I've actually brought it up once. But what you do is you turn the engine until that needle, you kind of rock it back and forth a little bit. Right there. And that is top dead center. So that's A way. Also on these engines, if you have the flywheel on the back, you'll see there's a mark on the flywheel. So obviously the flywheel is not in place on this engine, but if you look right there, there's a mark right next to that hole. And if you look at the arrow on the flywheel, that is also top dead center. And a less accurate way, if you got the lower sprocket on, the hole in the lower sprocket is at top dead center. But that little pointer on the timing cover can bend. So it's pretty close. It might be a degree or two off. Certainly this is the most accurate way. Because I don't know, this looks like at the factory that flywheel had a mark in it. They brought it up and somebody marked this with a chisel. So if you've got a different flywheel, whether that might move a little bit, I don't know. Whether it's enough to matter, I don't know that either. Probably not. I mean, we're talking, parts of a degree, and 1 degree on a crankshaft is only half a degree on the camshaft. So anyway, so the best way is to do that with a dial gauge. But if there are other ways if you don't have one. So the next thing to do is to get the cam lined up. So what the factory says is that you bring the engine to top dead center, and when number 4 which is the opposite cylinder from this. I mean, 1, 3, 4, 2, right? So this one fires 180 degrees on the cam away from that. When these valves are in overlap, so that's where the inlet is closing, the exhaust is just starting to open because there's a fair amount of overlap. It's like 20 or 30 degrees or something. I don't know what the specs are on the cam, but anyway, so one starts opening before the other one starts closing. What they tell you to do when the head's on is to open these two valves up to 50, 60 thousandths of an inch, and then to turn the cam until those two adjustments are equal. And you got to make sure you're on the overlap portion of the cam. So that's when both the lobes are facing up like that, and they're rocking in between. That'll mean number one is at the fire position. So my head is not here. So what I have done in the past is drop a couple of lifters in. So measure the lifters first, make sure they're the same thickness. Drop 2 lifters in, and then you can roll it till they balance by putting the end of your vernier calipers, you know, the long stick that sticks out here, right? That can go down in there and do it to the edge of the block. So I'm going to go check a couple of lifters and then we'll get back. So it's really fiddly, but we've got these two balanced out now to within a couple of thousandths of an inch. So I'm measuring this from the top edge of the lifter, so you only have to check the overall length of the lifter to make sure they're the same. And put that in. And there's a step on that thing, so I turn the step out, and then nice and vertical, lower it down. So it's just, this is on the lip about 1/8 of an inch, and you want to do it consistently because as you move this way, you're changing the length. So this is 377.1. .9. So I may try to get that just a touch closer, but you know, the gear has quarter tooth adjustment, and a couple of thousandths of an inch is not a quarter of a tooth. So once you got that balanced out, then you need to go and set the cam gear. So we'll do that next. Now, I don't know how well you're going to see this, but that bolt hole is centered in that hole. So when you look at these gears, there's actually 2 sets of holes, and they are half a tooth out of being 90 degrees. And if you flip the wheel over, you can get a quarter tooth adjustment. So I got lucky. This was on the right way around to start with. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and lock this. And you can see there's a mark on this lower gear. I'm going to take a chisel and make a mark on the upper gear so that we'll know what the alignment is if we have to take it apart again. And here's a helpful hint. So this is a brand new lock tab, so it's really flat. These things are almost impossible to bend when you put them on the first time. So I like to take a pair of pliers, just put a little bit of offset in those ears. It'll make your life so much easier in a couple of minutes here. I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see that they're slightly turned, and that means I'll be able to get the edge of a small screwdriver under there to bend them up and lock these bolts in. And of course, because, you know, belt and suspenders, we'll put a little Loctite on here too. So we need to put the timing chain tensioner in now. So that goes on here, like so. It's trapped between the timing cover timing cover, which is what causes the friction, Don't forget to use a washer. Be surprised how many had taken apart the washers weren't there. And then it just gets a cotter pin. Which apparently I grabbed one that's too big. Hang on, I'll go get another one. Let's try that again. There we go. And that just gets bent into place. So the only thing left to do now is to put the oil thrower, which looks like a large washer with a canted edge, and the angle goes out towards the timing cover. But unfortunately, I don't have that part because it didn't come with the motor and I didn't think to pick one up. So I'll need to do that. So you put that on, and then your timing cover goes on. You obviously want to put a new seal in it, and you just need to trap that, get it on, get started on here, and then the various bolts. This is also where the front lift point bolts onto here, so it gets a couple of longer screws right there, and that can't be changed at a later date. And also when you put the cover on, I always put just a little dab of gasket sealant on right here, and then a copper washer on the outside. And that's about it for the front. So I'm going to close this video out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and please comment. It makes a big difference for the algorithm for the channel. And we will see you on the next episode, which is when we'll probably button up the bottom of the engine. See you then.